Thank you, Violeta. My thanks to the Collaborative Partnership on Forests and to CIFOR for inviting me again to speak before you. I have been doing, as Violeta said, an update of this negotiation since Forest Day in Copenhagen when I was chairing the Red Plus negotiations. So as this is the last Forest Day during the COP, I admit I will miss this. Actually, not the speaking part. Believe it or not, I'm actually a shy person. Seriously, it is always challenging to sum up in 5 minutes or so everything that happened in a year of negotiations and what to expect in the next 7 days as parties buckle down to make decisions. I also had to be sure I do not violate confidences and the unwritten rules among negotiators about attribution when I make these updates. Aside from being shy, I am a don't tell guy. The integrity of the process requires confidentiality. At the same time, through the years that I facilitated Red Plus, I strongly believe in transparency and always brief stakeholders way back in the Copenhagen process. And I'm glad that the current chairs of both SUBSTA and the LCA Red process have done the same. So I will not miss Forest Day because this chance to talk to you is no longer going to happen. I will miss Forest Day because it has had a profound influence and impact on the negotiations throughout the years. I think when you look at the themes of all the Forest Day, what it intended to do in those themes actually happened in the negotiations as well. Aside from a wonderful, really wonderful place to explore new ideas and new issues, including new approaches to long-standing issues, Forest Day has also been a safe space and good venue to have conversations about serious issues we have not yet resolved in the negotiations. Just today, I attended a session moderated by Tony Simmons on drivers, and I was really fascinated by that discussion. That's a discussion that has not yet happened in the UNFCCC in an extended way. We were not again able to do it this year. We'll have to do it in the next SUBSTA. I also attended the Red Plus Finance discussion session just ended, and it also gave me new ideas on how to deal with Red Plus Finance and how to scale up Red Plus Finance. But aside from this source of ideas, Forest Days has also been a good place and a good venue to actually explore solutions to things happening in the negotiations. And let me just tell you 3 stories of past negotiations where, when I was chairing the LCA negotiations, where I found solutions or helped parties were able to find solutions during the Forest Day, when we were dealing with these issues. So it was in Forest Day in Copenhagen where I had a conversation with a colleague in a negotiation that led to a breakthrough to solving how a reference to free and prior informed consent was going to be included in the Red Plus decision. I had struggled for months in doing that, and it was a very difficult issue because while most countries had voted for the adoption of the Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights, the UN DRIP in the United Nations, a few countries did not and were hesitant about having a reference in the Red Plus decision. And it took a lot of negotiations back and forth. We did a lot of negotiation and we couldn't solve the problem. Until one day in a conversation in Copenhagen during Forest Day, I finally was able to get an idea from another colleague in the negotiation to solve that problem. And true enough, the next day on Monday when I proposed the solution, which is a reference to the noting of free and prior informed consent to the UN DRIP, the colleagues in the negotiations accepted that solution. It was also during Forest Day in Cancun where the idea of a safeguard information system was first discussed. If those of you who were there would recall, there was a whole debate on how do you actually implement safeguards at the international level? What's the role at the international level for implementation of safeguards? And we were actually at a stalemate after the first week until a few others actually in a conversation during Forest Day was able to devise a solution and found the idea of safeguard information system as the way forward for that. And true enough, in the next week when that was raised, although not formally, because if you remember in Cancun, we were not able to really have a formal discussion of the Red Plus discussions, but it was raised among the concerned parties, it was accepted as a solution. And last year in Durban, where the big issue in LCA Red Finance was markets and how to deal with it, I will now admit that I was able to test the solution in conversations here with colleagues on how to deal with markets and was able to find that solution as we went into the second week of negotiation in Durban. So I'm sure that today, as many negotiators are also here today, some of you have been discussing what to do with the roadblocks to agreement that we have encountered in SABSTA and likely to encounter in the LCA negotiations. This brings me to the update to the negotiations, which I will do for the last time, maybe, at least in Forest Day. It is not a secret that the SABSTA negotiations and forest monitoring systems and MRV did not result in an agreement. Take note that this is the first time actually in the whole process that RED Plus group, whether in SABTA or LCA, has not reached a conclusion on something very important. Of course, the conference is not over and we still have a second week of negotiations, and parties could always bring it up again at the COP level. But there is no certainty that this will be resolved. Essentially, parties could not agree on how to address international verification of emissions reductions and have decided to continue this work next year. The same possibility of stalemates exists for the LCA because there are serious issues that have to be dealt with there as well. But the problem, of course, with LCA is there's no LCA next year, or it looks like there will be no LCA next year. Who do we turn over the work? At least for the MRV work, it can be turned over back to SABSTA, but for the LCA work, there's no place to turn it over. There's always the possibility, of course, that the COP president will take on the SABSTA issue and bring it to the ministers, or if there are LCA issues, they could be bring to the ministers. But I'm not sure if this will necessarily make a difference. We need to ask whether there's a willingness now to compromise on this key fundamental issue as emissions verification or red finance issues that have to be dealt with. And here is the truth, I think. The truth is that the honeymoon is over for RED Plus. We are down now to the nuts and bolts of the mechanism, to things that matter most in the ground. Verification, how payments are to be made as being discussed in the RED Plus, the LCA discussions, the inclusion of non-carbon benefits, the implementation of safeguards, the establishment of institutional arrangements like a RED committee or some other system to provide a platform for continued discussion of RED Plus concerns. In most ways, especially if we actually nail down RMMRV, which I actually thought we would be able to do here in Durban, hopefully we can still do next week, the international policy framework on RED Plus is complete. And we should no longer expect signals from the UNFCCC except the ones we already have. I mean, maybe it's not realistic to think that we can push the process even further and get more from what we've already done over the last 5 years. My own reflection on this is that as potentially good a mechanism I think RED Plus could be and is, it is essentially limited by its emphasis on forests. In that sense, RED Plus from both a climate and development point of view is limited by its own vision, and even as we implement it now, and we need to implement it in the pre-2020 period, we must think beyond RED Plus in the UNFCCC and move on to the obvious thing. And without actually knowing the theme or studying the theme of this Forest Day and Agriculture Day, for me, it's quite obvious that a landscape approach which combines forest, agriculture, and other land uses with a holistic approach and common rules is the way forward. And in this sense, the ADP discussions and negotiations provide an opportunity to correct the things that might have to be corrected in the next years to come, provide an opportunity for the post-2020 world. Right now, for example, I've been following, and don't ask me how I do it. I do it electronically, I do it with other colleagues. I'm following 6 negotiations: LULUCF, SABSTA, RED, LCA RED, Agriculture and Adaptation, and of course the ADP. And it's crazy when you're doing that and looking at it from a land use point of view, because it does sectoralize things and you come out with solutions that are not really going to be as effective on the ground as if you had an integrated approach. But an integrated approach, a landscape approach, brings its own challenges, of course, as we have seen during the day. This might be the last Forest Day during COP, but I'm sure we will do something equally useful, maybe even better, because the vacuum created will demand no less. Thank you and good evening.